Another year, another climate conference. Will this one be any different, or will it just be more greenwashing? I'm in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, covering the COP27 climate conference, and I thought, why not do an episode of Can It Save the Planet on climate conferences? While I'm here, talking to all these climate experts. Well, except for Greta. She skipped out in part because of her own concerns with greenwashing.
Last year, the fossil fuel lobby had more representatives than any other nation, so just going to COP is maybe not enough to show that I'm paying attention to this.
For those who might not know, COP27 stands for the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This year is the 27th gathering. Mouthful, I know. But the goal of these conferences is to bring the world together and solve the climate crisis. They negotiate treaties, create frameworks, and make pledges to create a more livable, thriving planet for the 8 billion humans on it. But the truth that's becoming more clear is that sometimes the framework is hardly fully implemented, the pledges can turn into false promises, and goals are sometimes not met. Like the lack of funding for climate-vulnerable countries that contribute the least emissions but are impacted the most by the crisis. Yet, people from around the world keep coming to these conferences year after year, feeling hopeful for change. So, I want to know, do climate negotiations at conferences actually generate change? Is there a way to prevent the polluters from hijacking the climate talks? And do these conversations actually scale down to places that are being impacted the most? Let's find out. On today's episode of Can It Save the Planet, we're talking to negotiators, activists, and scientists at COP27 to figure out whether conferences like this can have a tangible impact on climate change.
It's a means to an end. We're not going to resolve everything at this COP, but we need to see some clear implementation.
And ultimately find out if COP can save the planet. You might know about COP because of the Paris Agreement, which is one of its flagship achievements. It's the treaty that emerged from the COP21 in 2015 between 195 countries that aim to limit the global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius while pursuing all efforts to keeping the temperatures increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's a pretty big accomplishment, to get most of the world's leaders in one room agreeing on the same thing and actually signing their commitment to it. Although the Paris Agreement can arguably be considered a win and a good outcome from this conference, not every year has generated similar results. In fact, the conference is infamous for dodging mention of fossil fuels in its final agreements and allowing big polluters to enter negotiations. For example, the phrase fossil fuels appears nowhere in the 7,000 plus word 2015 Paris Agreement document. The terms coal, oil, and natural gas are also missing. Last year, COP26 in Glasgow was my first year attending a COP conference. So, to learn more about the history, the good, and the bad of these events, we'll talk to someone who has been to every COP in history. Salim ul Hoque is a Bangladeshi British scientist and professor who has seen COP's evolution firsthand, the good, the bad, and the unexpected. Yet, he remains positive.
It used to be just a few thousand people who were government officials negotiating language and text on decisions. It's now grown to many tens of thousands of people.
What are some of the other good outcomes of this conference?
I think the best outcome throughout 27 years is the level of awareness globally.
What are some of the bad outcomes?
Unfortunately, some of the leading countries that are responsible for emissions not doing enough.
But Salim says the worst thing to have developed throughout the conference is the amount of greenwashing, like Coca-Cola, a major polluter, sponsoring the conference, as well as fossil fuel lobbyists being allowed to negotiate.
Well, greenwashing is a phenomenon that we have to live with. Some of the companies try and do what they promise to do. Quite a few companies don't, and particularly the fossil fuel companies are the ones that are the biggest culprits. The fossil fuel companies have to cease to exist, absolutely.
Can COP help save the planet?
COP is one way to save the planet, but if we don't implement what we agree, then we won't be able to save the planet.
So that's what Salim has to say. But what about someone who's been close to negotiations? Yamid Dagnier has supported negotiations for 15 years and believes conversations around climate must be inclusive and hold everyone accountable.
The whole point for 200 countries who have different national interests is to find consensus that will provide signals to the rest of the world of where we're going to go.
But no matter how successful negotiations turn out, those conversations sometimes create more frustration than hope.
Vulnerable countries have not seen progress on reducing emissions. And I think one of the stakes of this COP is whether we are going to live it with more hope and more trust among countries that we are going to take this forward. A COP is never an end. It's a means to an end.
Although at a top level, things might not be scaling down, at a grassroots level, conversations are turned into action and solutions are being implemented.
The COP is not just what happens in the negotiations. Outside the negotiations, there are initiatives beyond government that needs to happen. When you come to the COP, and you cannot sit in the room of negotiation, it's okay because there's still a lot of opportunity to learn and to be very active in finding solutions on the ground with different partners. How you're going to blend different type of financing from different actors to really go further faster too. So the youth bring creativity, passion, determination. We see more young people actually negotiating. So yes, if you want to be a negotiator, consider this. It's not just for the old man, white man.
Can COP27 help save the planet?
Of course it can, but this is too big of a problem to be resolved just by one COP.
Alright, I got two similar optimistic perspectives on the conference, but I wanted to get the vibe check on the feelings of other attendees. So I went around asking everyone I interviewed the same question.
Yes, it can save the planet if there's follow through, if there's follow up, if people really do understand that this is an accountability system.
No, I don't think COP27 can save the planet because I don't think that change happens within 2 weeks of a conference. For us to achieve climate justice, we need a systemic transformation.
No. COP27 is a step in the right direction, but I don't want 27 more of these.
No, one single COP meeting cannot save the planet.
I am an optimist. I want to believe that.
This is the 27th time that the conference of the parties are sitting around and trying to find an arrangement, but we have not got it.
I truly was not expecting all the different answers, but I do appreciate all the different perspectives and the optimism for the future of our planet. Now, before we get to our conclusion, I'd like to thank the Global Commons Alliance for sponsoring this episode.
Climate change will continue to amplify every risk humanity already faces in a way that is even more unjust. Only by rapidly reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting nature can we substantially reduce risk. We can and we must do this. The lives and the well-being of billions of people depend on it.
Now, back to the episode. So this is what we've learned so far. Number one, climate negotiations do generate change. Number two, polluters are hard to remove from the conversation. And number three, conversations don't always scale down to the places that are being impacted the most. So, can COP save the planet? No, at least not as it stands and not after talking to everyone here. However, I do see some value that these conferences bring, like providing a world stage for voices that don't typically have a platform, holding governments accountable, and generally elevating climate conversations to the general public through media coverage, like us. But the biggest reason most people are quick to say no, it can't save the planet, is because there are too many promises made that take too long to come to fruition. Like when the richer countries said they commit to provide $100 billion a year in climate finance to climate vulnerable countries by 2020, but never did. Or many nations don't update their nationally determined contributions, NDCs for short, which are the long-term goals countries set to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change impacts. There are also a lot of problematic things with this year's conference, like Coca-Cola sponsoring the conference, which, by the way, has been found, according to one brand audit, to be the world's biggest plastic polluter for the 4th consecutive year. Then there's the fact that there are more fossil fuel delegates at the conference than representatives for the top 10 most impacted countries by the climate crisis. I do want to end this on a positive note by highlighting some of the framework that has made strides at this year's conference. Obviously, there's the momentum to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. I spoke to scientists like Johan Rockström who believe we can still meet the target. Then there's the 30 by 30 pledge, which commits countries to protecting 30% of the world's land and oceans by 2030. At COP26, there were only 70 countries that pledged support, but at COP27, that number increased to 112. And finally, adding loss and damage to the COP27 agenda. For 3 decades, developing countries have been asking industrialized nations to compensate for the devastating losses they have incurred from climate-related disasters. I'm normally someone who likes to be realistic and quite often a bit jaded. But I can say this conference does make me feel optimistic about the future of the planet. The conference itself won't be the one that saves the planet, but I do think humans can.